A man named Samuel lived in a small village between rolling hills and thick forests. Samuel was known for his kind heart and willingness to help others. He had many friends and was always surrounded by people who admired his wisdom and gentle spirit. Despite his outward contentment, Samuel often felt a deep restlessness in his soul. There was a longing within him, a desire for something more that he couldn't quite name. Without warning, everything in Samuel's life began to change one day. His friends, one by one, started to drift away. Some moved to distant towns, while others became absorbed in their own lives, leaving little time for Samuel. Even those who remained nearby seemed distant and preoccupied, as if an invisible barrier had been placed between them and him. Samuel was bewildered by this sudden isolation. He prayed earnestly, asking God why he had allowed this to happen. "Why am I alone, Lord? Have I done something wrong?" But the only response was a silence that echoed in the empty spaces of his once busy life. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel's loneliness deepened. He tried to fill the void by keeping himself busy with work, but even that did not bring him the satisfaction it once had. He withdrew increasingly, spending long hours walking through the fields and forests, seeking solace in nature. The beauty of the landscape was a comfort, but it did little to ease the ache in his heart. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the hills, Samuel wandered into a secluded valley he had never visited. It was a quiet, peaceful place, untouched by the hustle of the village. A small stream flowed through the center, its gentle babble the only sound in the stillness. Samuel sat by the water's edge, staring at his reflection, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to cry. As tears flowed, so did his prayers. But they were different now, less about seeking answers and more about seeking comfort. "I don't understand, Lord," he whispered, "but I trust you have a reason for this. Please show me what I need to learn." In the quiet of the valley, something strange happened. Samuel felt a deep peace wash over him, as if the air around him had shifted. He heard no voice and saw no vision, but he knew, without a doubt, that God was with him at that moment. The isolation and loneliness all began to make sense, not logically, but in a way that spoke to his spirit. Over the following days, Samuel returned to the valley often, drawn to its solitude and the sense of God's presence that seemed to linger there. It became his sanctuary, where he could be alone with his thoughts and God. He began to realize that the isolation he had feared was not a punishment, but a gift. It was a time set aside for him to grow, deepen his faith, and listen more intently to the whispers of the divine. Through his solitude, Samuel discovered things about himself he had never known. He learned to face his fears, confront the doubts that had long plagued him, and trust in God's plan even when he couldn't see it. He began to understand that sometimes God isolates us, not to hurt us, but to heal us, to strip away the noise and distractions of life so that we can hear his voice more clearly. Samuel's loneliness gave way to a profound sense of purpose as the months passed. He felt a new calling emerging from within, a desire to use the lessons he had learned in the valley to help others struggling with isolation. He returned to the village, not as the same man who had left, but as someone transformed by his time alone with God. Samuel started reaching out to those in the village suffering, offering them the same comfort he had found in the valley. He shared his story, his journey through the darkness of loneliness to the light of understanding. In doing so, he became a beacon of hope for many. Word of Samuel's transformation spread, and soon, People from neighboring villages began to seek him out. Drawn by the peace and wisdom he seemed to radiate, he welcomed them all, guiding them through their valleys of solitude and helping them to see that sometimes God isolates us to draw us closer to him, to teach us, and to shape us into who we are meant to be. In time, Samuel saw his isolation not as a curse, but as a blessing. It had been a season of preparation when God had taken him aside to equip him for the work he was destined to do. He no longer feared being alone, for he knew that in the quiet and stillness God was there, shaping, guiding, and preparing him for the path ahead. The valley that had once been a place of sorrow became a place of renewal, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, God is with us, leading us through the wilderness and into the light. Isolated seasons are some of the most challenging times in our spiritual journey. They compel us to rely on God in more radical and extreme ways than usual, and encourage us to place more faith in God's ways rather than our own. God isolates us to prepare us for his plans for our lives. During these times, he equips, strengthens, and shapes us into vessels to fulfill his purpose. God uses those seasons of being alone and isolated to draw us closer to him, to refine and mold us, to strip away what isn't needed, and largely to shape us into who we need to be. Whatever the cause for your isolation, you are probably experiencing intense emotions and confusion about why things are happening the way they are. As hard as these times can be, you can take comfort in knowing that God is with you and has a purpose for whatever you are going through. God is molding you during that time. One of the most important things you can do during those times is to look to Christ and keep your eyes fixed on him. He has been through isolation. In the desert for 40 days, he was alone and completely removed from everything. He can give you the strength to persevere through it. God's isolation isn't abandonment, even though it may feel like it. He puts us in an isolation season because he's preparing us. So embrace it as a time of growth and trust in his plan. Allow God to work in you during this time. Trust that he is guiding you through this season of isolation for a greater purpose. Subscribe for more videos. Thank you.